The wind that came off Sparrowbrush Ridge that spring was a strange one. Dry, warm too early, and scented faintly with ash and snowmelt. It whispered through the skeletal cottonwoods like someone trying not to wake a house already holding its breath. Down a long and rutted trail, 3 women stood shoulder to shoulder in pressed dresses and quiet dread, watching the road that curled like a snake between the buttes. Not one of them spoke, but each held something heavy in her chest. Willamay's hands were calloused from rope and rifle. Her boots were cracked with years, and though her shoulders stood proud, her eyes had gone hollow with the burden of keeping what their father left behind. She was the oldest, by years and sorrows, and the one who signed the letters. Behind her, Juniper shifted her weight impatiently, arms crossed under her russet shawl, her lips pursed like she'd already decided to dislike whoever arrived. Her beauty had made men foolish once. Now it just made her cruel. Temperance, youngest by a decade and soft in all the places her sisters had hardened, held a baby blue ribbon in her fingers like she didn't know whether to tie it in her hair or let it blow away. She smiled at the horizon, but it was a rehearsed smile, the kind children give before punishment. "They're late," Juniper muttered, the first to break the silence, voice sharp as glass. "They're men riding across 3 states," Willamay said without turning. "They'll come when they come." But even she scanned the ridgeline again, her jaw tight. They had paid dearly for this. Dowry from the last of the silver hidden beneath the porch, letters sent in secret through the preacher's boy, 3 desperate pleas wrapped in false charm. They'd promised land, meals, peace. The truth was, none of that remained. Down the ridge came the riders. 3 men on tired horses, each as different as the worries etched into the sisters' spines. The first was broad-shouldered, plain, and quiet, with a beard like bark and eyes that took in everything and offered nothing back. His name, they would learn, was Ezekiel Hart. He tipped his hat but didn't smile, and Willamay felt something shift in her, like a gate blown open by a storm. Behind him rode Caleb Boone, all white teeth and charm, his hat cocked at an arrogant angle, with a revolver polished brighter than sense. Juniper's eyebrows rose, not in admiration, but wariness. Last came Samuel Pike, youngest of the 3, freckled and wiry, with a bashful look like he might apologize for the very air he breathed. He nodded at Temperance and nearly fell off his horse when she smiled back. The introductions were brief, hands shaken with too much formality. Caleb laughed too loud. Samuel stuttered. Ezekiel said nothing at all. They were strangers bound by paper and desperation. The women brought them into the manor, what was left of it, and closed the door behind them. Sparrowbrush Manor had once been the jewel of the valley, but the years had not been kind. The wallpaper peeled like shedding skin, the roof leaked, and the bones of the house creaked with memory. Still, they kept it clean. Willamay insisted. Dirt made trouble grow. They dined on cornbread, boiled beans, and silence. The men took their plates without complaint. Caleb asked about land boundaries and livestock. Juniper answered with vague irritation. Samuel complimented the meal, and Temperance blushed. Ezekiel simply ate, eyes flicking toward every creak of the floorboards as though expecting something to leap from them. That night, the wind picked up. It moaned low against the eaves like it had something important to say but couldn't form the words. Willamay stood in the barn long after the others had gone to bed, watching the lanterns swing in the rafters. Ezekiel entered without knocking. She turned, expecting to send him out, but he only nodded and picked up a pitchfork, helping her finish the mucking in silence. "You don't talk much," she said. "I don't waste words," he replied. She watched him work, efficient and quiet. He didn't ask what she was doing out there in the dark. She didn't ask why he followed. In the room Temperance now shared with Samuel, she sat on the bed while he curled a blanket on the floor. "You don't have to," she said gently. He shook his head. "Reckon it's best to start with respect." She nodded, not quite understanding, but touched by the courtesy. It was the first time in months a man had offered her something without reaching to take more. Juniper stood by her window, watching Caleb smoke by the fence. He'd poured half a bottle of whiskey into himself after dinner and laughed at his own jokes until even the moon seemed tired of him. She didn't know if she hated him yet, but she hated what he'd already awoken in her, the reminder that charm always came with a hook. The next morning, the town whispered. By noon, 3 letters had been read aloud over whiskey and church pews alike. The Baroness sisters bought their men like horses, 3 husbands in one day. The preacher looked the other way. The general store raised prices. A woman at the well snorted when Temperance passed. Juniper slammed the paper on the table. "They think we're desperate," she hissed. "We are," Willamay replied. Juniper stood to leave. "Speak for yourself." In the stable, Ezekiel mended a gate that hadn't been used in years. Willamay watched from the porch, arms folded. He worked like someone who owed a debt he hadn't spoken of. She wondered what man did such things without being asked. That afternoon, a chicken was found with its neck twisted. Just one. No footprints. No blood. Caleb blamed a fox. Samuel offered to build a new coop. Ezekiel said nothing, but sharpened an axe in the yard without being told. At supper, Temperance prayed aloud. Juniper rolled her eyes. Willamay listened, eyes closed. "Please help us not become strangers to each other." The table went quiet. That night, someone walked the halls. Floorboards creaked in patterns not made by wind. Juniper heard a door open, soft and slow. When she lit her lamp, no one was there, but the ledger in her room was gone. Come morning, Willamay asked who'd been in the study. No one spoke. Samuel looked guilty, but only because he always did. Caleb shrugged and said, "Must have been a ghost." Ezekiel didn't even look up. Outside, the weather warmed, but the ridge remained gray and brittle, like spring couldn't quite find a way in. Birds returned to the branches, only to fly away again. The sisters no longer stood together in the yard. They passed like shadows in hallways, brushing sleeves but not words. The men split their labors, fences mended, firewood cut, but the ground beneath them felt hollow. That evening, a thunderhead rolled over the ridge. Lightning split the butte in the distance. As the storm broke, Juniper stood alone on the porch, watching the men bring in the horses. Her hair clung to her face, soaked. She didn't go inside. "You'll catch cold," came Ezekiel's voice behind her. She turned, startled. "A little rain won't kill me." "Most folks don't die from what they expect," he replied, then turned and walked back inside. She watched him go, her arms wrapped around herself. Not from cold, but the kind of quiet that comes when someone sees past your armor and says nothing about it. Later, Temperance found a ribbon tied around her doorknob. The baby blue one she'd dropped by the creek days ago. It was clean, retied neatly. She looked around, but no one admitted to finding it. She kept it. And still, the wind came through the ridge. Still it whispered strange things through the trees. Still the house held its breath. Sparrowbrush Ridge had been quiet for too long, and now it was waking up. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm, one made of watchful glances and tasks performed with stiff politeness. It was not peace, not trust, but something just shy of both. The sun lingered longer in the sky, as if unsure whether to scorch or soothe, and the soil began to split in hairline cracks that snaked toward the house like unspoken truths. Willamay took to walking the perimeter of the property just after dawn. She carried her rifle loosely, but her eyes moved with the discipline of someone who had learned to expect the worst. Ezekiel often joined her, wordless, his shadow just a few paces behind. He never asked where they were going, nor why. He simply followed, and she let him. Inside the house, Juniper paced like a caged lynx. She read through the ledger once a day, muttering numbers and names under her breath, as if profit could be conjured from columns alone. Caleb spent most of his time in town, gambling, charming, and gathering whispers. He brought back news of outlaw movement, saloon gossip, and debts unpaid. None of it helped. He said he was working the long game. Juniper didn't ask what that meant. Temperance and Samuel stayed mostly in the garden. She dug with careful hands, and he built small raised beds with salvaged wood. He hummed while he worked, low and tuneless. Temperance found herself listening for that sound more than she realized, surprised by how the silence pressed in when it stopped. On the third morning, they found the barn door ajar. The horses, usually still and quiet, stamped and whinnied nervously. One had blood on its flank, a shallow, deliberate cut, Not deep enough to lame it, just enough to send a message. No tracks. No witnesses. Willamay said nothing as she cleaned the wound. Ezekiel watched her hands, then the tree-lean. His jaw worked tight. Juniper stormed into the house and accused Caleb before the blood was even scrubbed off the stall. "You're the only one who leaves this place," she hissed. "You think they didn't follow you back?" He raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm stupid enough to lead men here?" She scoffed. "I think you're reckless enough not to care." Caleb turned away, bottle already in hand. "If they come, I'll shoot first." But Juniper wasn't convinced, and neither was anyone else. That night, Willamay nailed the barn shut from the inside. She didn't trust locks anymore. Ezekiel offered no words, but stood beside her as she hammered. The moon was high, throwing silver lines over the fields. "They're testing us," she said finally. He nodded once. "They'll come again." In the kitchen, Samuel boiled willow bark tea. Temperance had a cough that wouldn't quit. She tried to hide it behind her sleeve, but he noticed. He always did. "It's nothin'," she said softly, sitting at the edge of the hearth. "Still," he replied, placing the tin cup in her hands, "you don't want a nothing turning to something." She looked at him over the rim of the cup, eyes wide and uncertain. He met her gaze with quiet steadiness, and something passed between them, warm, hesitant, and real. Upstairs, Juniper stared at herself in the cracked mirror. Her reflection looked older. Not in years, but in wear, like a silk dress soaked through in storm. She touched her cheek where Caleb's words had left their mark earlier that day, and for a flicker of a second, she hated herself more than him. By the next evening, a note appeared nailed to the barn gate. "This ridge belongs to us. Sell or be buried." No one saw who did it. No dogs barked. No one slept that night. Willamay read it once, then burned it in the stove. "We don't run," she said flatly. No one disagreed aloud, but fear moved like a draft through every corridor. Samuel built a lantern post near the road, and lit it each night. Ezekiel oiled his rifle and sat by the kitchen door. Caleb drank. Juniper withdrew further, curling into herself like a threatened vine. The following day, Temperance collapsed during morning chores. Her face was pale as milk, her hands shaking. Samuel caught her before she hit the ground. "She's burning up," he said, voice cracking. Willamay brought water. Juniper fumbled for cloth. Ezekiel fetched herbs he remembered from somewhere long ago. Caleb stood in the corner, useless. "Was it the tea?" Juniper whispered, horrified. "It was the stew," Willamay muttered darkly. "The one we all ate." Juniper's eyes went wide. She was the only one who got sick. A long silence followed. Willamay turned her face to the window. "That means someone knew the rest of us wouldn't eat much. Someone knew she always finishes her plate." Suspicion unfurled like smoke, curling into every eye in the room. Juniper looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back. "I wouldn't hurt the girl," he said. "Ain't in me." "No," Juniper replied bitterly. "But hurting someone to hurt me? That might be." He left without another word. That night, his saddlebag was missing, along with a silver heirloom bracelet that had belonged to their mother. Willamay didn't chase him. Neither did Juniper. It was Temperance, fevered and drifting, who murmured his name once in her sleep. Only once. The next morning, the house was still. No new threats, no new blood. Just silence, and the breathless waiting of people trapped too long together with nothing but fear and guilt. Willamay took Ezekiel out to the north fence line. They walked side by side, boots cracking the brittle dirt. "You think it's him?" she asked. Ezekiel didn't answer for a while. Then, "He don't have the hands for poison. But maybe the friends who follow him do." She nodded. "You'd tell me if it were you?" He stopped walking, turned to face her. "If I wanted to kill someone, I'd do it clean." Oddly, that reassured her. In the garden, the beans had started to sprout. Samuel knelt beside them, dirt under his nails, watching green life push through the earth like a promise. Temperance, pale but upright, sat beside him. She reached out and touched the tip of a shoot, smiling faintly. "It's growing," she said. "Just needs sun and quiet," he replied. She looked at him for a long time. "Me too." Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away. Later, Juniper found herself alone in the dining room. She held the ledger in one hand, Caleb's flask in the other. She didn't drink. She just stared at both objects like they might speak if she stared long enough. Willamay entered, wiping her hands on a towel. "You never wanted this," Juniper said without turning. "Willamay Saturday, none of us did. We were just the ones who stayed." Juniper's voice cracked. "What if staying ruins us anyway? Then at least we'll know we tried. Together." For a moment, Juniper looked like the girl she once was, before their father died, before the land turned cruel, before trust became a luxury. She closed the ledger and set the flask aside. That night, they all ate in the same room. No one smiled, but no one left early. Temperance leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder. Ezekiel passed the salt without being asked. Willamay watched them all, hands folded, eyes not soft, but no longer hard. The wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. It carried no notes this time, no threats. Only the sound of trees swaying, alive, stubborn, refusing to fall. They were six now, whether they liked it or not. Six set to weather the storm. Outside, a figure watched from the trees. Eyes gleamed once in the lantern light before vanishing into the dark. Inside, Willamay stood and barred the door. The snow came early, soft and deceiving. At first it was just a whisper in the sky, a hush that dusted fence posts and branches in a veil too delicate to threaten. But by the second morning, it lay thick over Sparrowbrush Ridge, muffling footsteps and burying the remnants of burnt wood and broken fences beneath its cold indifference. The world was whitewashed, and if one didn't know better, they might think peace had finally come. But blood sinks, even in snow. Temperance stirred beneath the quilts, her fever broken but her limbs still slow, like her soul had wandered somewhere far and was unsure about returning. Samuel sat beside her bed, hands rough with cold, a book open but unread in his lap. He looked at her like she was the last fragile light in a long tunnel. She opened her eyes and smiled, faint but present. "Morning," she rasped. Samuel nodded, not trusting his voice. The joy that threatened to rise in his chest was too wild for words. Downstairs, Willamay chopped firewood in the drifting snow. The rhythm steadied her, splinter, crack, thud, and for a moment she felt like she could hold the world together with just her arms. Ezekiel worked beside her, fixing the hinges on the barn door that had been kicked loose again in the night. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. A shared glance between hammer strikes said enough. Someone had been here, again. Inside, Juniper stood at the long dining table, organizing what remained of their valuables. The heirlooms were fewer now. A watch missing. A ring that once belonged to their mother gone. She didn't ask Caleb about it anymore. She didn't have to. His absence answered enough. Caleb had not returned since the night Temperance took ill. And none of them had gone looking. Juniper's fingers paused on a folded piece of parchment tucked beneath the ledger, an envelope addressed in her own handwriting. A letter she'd written weeks ago and never mailed, promising wealth and land to a stranger whose name she could barely recall. She held it over the fire, then pulled her hand back. Not yet. She wasn't done lying to herself. By midday, the sky darkened again. The snow, light at first, thickened to a curtain. Sparrowbrush Ridge became an island, and the rest of the world drifted out of reach. Willamay checked the rifles. Ezekiel repaired a cracked windowpane with lengths of old pine. Temperance, now able to sit up, watched the snow fall in silence. Her gaze tracked the flakes like they were some kind of message, beautiful and ominous. Samuel cooked. He did so often now. It gave his hands purpose, and the warmth of the stove masked the cold creeping into the walls. He ladled broth into a bowl and brought it to Temperance. She took it with both hands, her smile clearer this time. "Thank you," she said softly. He hesitated. Then, "You saved that blue ribbon?" She nodded, and he looked away, heart caught in his throat. He hadn't meant to be seen. That night, as wind howled against the shutters, they sat around the table again, the 5 of them. The 6th remained absent, like a question with no answer. They didn't light all the lamps, only one in the center. The shadows clung to corners. Conversation was brief, guarded. Each word weighed and measured. Juniper broke first. "I want to know where he went." Willamay didn't look up. "He's gone." "He knows things," Juniper pressed. "Things about the land, the deed, the people watching this house." "He was one of the people watching this house," Willamay replied. Her voice was quiet, final. Juniper slammed her spoon down. "And you let him walk away." "I didn't stop you," Willamay said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was brimming with everything unsaid. Temperance coughed, and Samuel rose immediately to steady her, hand brushing her shoulder with care. She leaned into him, eyes closed. Juniper looked away, ashamed of how she envied that softness. The storm reached its peak by midnight. Snow piled against the windows. Ice latticed the glass in delicate spiderwebs. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled. Then, unmistakably, boots crunching on snow. Willamay was on her feet in an instant. Ezekiel followed. He handed her a rifle, took the other. They moved through the house like the breath of winter itself, silent and absolute. The front door creaked open. There, at the edge of the porch light, stood Caleb. His coat was torn, face bruised, a gash above his eye bleeding down into the collar of his shirt. "Help," he said, voice hoarse. "They're coming." Willamay raised her rifle. "Why should we believe you?" "They followed me," he said. "3 of them. Maybe 4. I didn't know they'd come this fast." "Did you bring them?" Ezekiel asked flatly. Caleb didn't answer. Willamay stepped forward. "If this is a trick." "It's not," Caleb whispered. "Please. I messed up." "But Juniper." "Don't say her name," Willamay snapped. Juniper appeared in the doorway behind them, a lantern in hand. Her face went pale at the sight of him. "Where's the bracelet, Caleb?" He looked down. "Pawned it. Thought I could win it back." "You always do." A flash of emotion crossed her face. Fury, grief, and something else, deeper, older. Behind the barn, a shot rang out. Everyone froze. Then another, closer. A scream. "They're here," Caleb breathed. Willamay pushed him inside. Ezekiel slammed the door. The house turned to war. Samuel helped Temperance to the root cellar, wrapping her in every blanket they had. "Stay here. Don't come out unless you hear my voice." She gripped his sleeve. He leaned down, pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll come back." Juniper loaded the last of the shells into her pistol with shaking hands. "I never thought I'd have to do this again." "You don't," Willamay said. "You choose to." Outside, figures emerged through the snow, black coats, rifles, silence. No words. No warnings. Just death come walking. The sisters and their men returned fire from windows and doorways. The shots echoed like thunder off the frozen walls of the ridge. Ezekiel moved like water, fluid, precise. Willamay took down 2, her jaw clenched, her breath calm. Juniper aimed and missed, then hit. The man dropped. Her hands trembled. Caleb ducked behind the stove, firing blindly. A shot grazed his arm. He screamed, dropped his gun, cowered. Another shot crashed through the window, splintering wood. Then, a scream upstairs. "Samuel." Willamay looked to Ezekiel. "Hold here." She ran for the stairs. Samuel was bleeding from the shoulder, one of the outlaws dragging him across the hall. Willamay didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle and fired. The man fell. Samuel collapsed, panting. "You came," he said, voice tight. "I always do." Downstairs, Caleb ran. Out the back. Juniper saw him go. She followed. He staggered into the snow, calling for his horse. None answered. Juniper caught up to him by the barn. "You said you'd protect us," she said. "I tried." "You poisoned her." "No," he cried. "I swear I didn't. I never meant for." She pulled the trigger. The shot rang across the ridge like a church bell at a funeral. Inside, the silence was thick. The gunfire had stopped. The snow fell again, covering blood, boot prints, broken glass, covering truth and lies alike. By morning, the sun rose pale and unforgiving. They buried the bodies near the edge of the ridge, far from the old family plot. Juniper said nothing as they lowered Caleb's corpse into the frozen earth. She didn't cry, but her fingers trembled when she let go of the shovel. Temperance emerged from the cellar, wrapped in Samuel's coat. Her smile was faint, but alive. Samuel walked beside her, pale but breathing. Ezekiel stood watch over the graves. Willamay lit a lantern at each cross. "Will they come back?" Temperance asked. Willamay looked to the trees, the snow, the stillness. "They'll think twice." The sisters stood together again, for the first time in years. They did not hold hands. They didn't need to. The wind rolled over the ridge, slow and cold, brushing snow across the blood-soaked soil. It was not forgiveness, but it was a beginning. Willamay had taken to walking alone again. Each dawn, she'd circle the property with the same methodical quiet as before, but now she lingered in places she once passed, beneath the dead cottonwood near the barn, beside the half-burned chicken coop, at the graves. Ezekiel watched her from the porch sometimes, but he never followed. He understood that some silences weren't invitations, only echoes that needed time to fade. Inside the manor, Temperance carried a warmth that defied the cold still seeping through the walls. Her cheeks held color again. She laughed, softly, rarely, but enough to stitch comfort into the rooms she passed through. Samuel never strayed far. He'd found purpose in tending her garden rows, now sprouting with green flecks of survival, and in fixing hinges, sanding rails, making a home out of wreckage. Juniper, however, had turned inward. She spent her days in the cellar where the deed was locked away, unrolling blueprints of the land's borders, studying old maps. At night, she sat alone by the fire, letters spread around her like confessions. She did not mention Caleb. Not once. But his death lived in her hands, her voice, the way she opened and closed drawers with a strange kind of reverence, like something sacred had been broken inside her and no one was allowed to look too closely. One morning, Willamay found the door to the old study wide open. She hadn't touched that room in weeks. Not since the storm, not since they buried the last of the men who'd come to take what wasn't theirs. Dust motes turned in sunbeams like little spirits, and on the desk sat the ledger, its spine cracked. Next to it, 3 old envelopes, one addressed to each sister, each sealed in wax. Juniper stepped through the doorway behind her. "I wrote those before they came," she said. "Back when I thought one of us wouldn't survive." Willamay didn't touch the letters. "What changed?" "Nothing," Juniper answered. "I just realized I wouldn't have been the one worth saving." The words hovered between them, brittle and honest. "I don't believe that," Willamay said. Juniper leaned against the frame, tired. "I think you might be the only one who doesn't." Later that day, a rider came. He wore no insignia. He carried no threat. Just a ledger book and a pen and a hat too clean for the trail. He asked for the owner of Sparrowbrush Ridge, and when Willamay stepped forward, he flinched as if seeing a woman instead of a name offended his paperwork. "I represent the land registrar of Mesquite County," he said. "We've received a challenge on your claim." Willamay didn't blink. "Who challenged it?" "I can't release that information without." Juniper stepped beside her. "Say the name." The man hesitated, then opened the book. "Caleb Boone. Filed 4 weeks ago, under the assertion that the deed is fraudulent. Claims improper transfer of title and unlawful use of marital signatures. That deed was signed by my father and witnessed by 2 justices," Willamay said. Her voice was iron. "Yes," the man said. "But the land grant itself was contested after his death. Boone alleges you withheld that information from your husbands and engaged in collusion to maintain a false inheritance. Juniper laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. That son of a bitch. Is the claim still active? Willamay asked. The man hesitated. His death does not nullify the claim. A proxy is pursuing it now. Miss Ella Vaughn. Juniper's eyes darkened. His sister. She was present when the documents were filed. She claims she witnessed the falsification. Willamay looked at Juniper. Did she? No, Juniper said. But I lied about other things. That might be enough. That evening, the sisters gathered in the parlor. The fire burned low. Temperance stirred a pot of tea. Juniper stood by the window, arms crossed. Willamay sat in the old rocking chair that had once belonged to their mother, staring into the fire like it held the answers she needed. She wants the land, Juniper said. She'll drag us through every court between here and Denver. She doesn't want the land, Willamay replied. She wants revenge. Then let her come, Samuel said. He stood by the door, watchful as always. We don't have the strength for another fight, Willamay said. Not legal, not physical. Not now. I'll leave, Juniper said. Temperance dropped the spoon she was holding. I'll go east, Juniper continued. Take whatever she offers to drop the claim. It's me she wants punished. No, Willamay said. She doesn't get to win like that. Then what? Juniper snapped. Do we let her take everything just to prove a point? No, Willamay said again. We remind her who we are. That night, Willamay wrote a letter to Ella Vaughn. It was short. It offered a meeting, woman to woman, without lawyers, without threats. She folded it neatly and handed it to Ezekiel. Ride to Mesquite, she said. Give this to her. No one else. He looked her in the eyes. You sure? I don't want her to think we're hiding. When he left, Willamay stood at the edge of the porch and watched the road until his figure vanished beyond the horizon. The waiting returned. It filled the house like mist. The tension crept back into every wallboard, every whisper. Samuel stayed near Temperance, whose strength was slowly returning. She asked him questions about the stars, about dreams, about where he would go if he could start again. He never answered the last one. Juniper cleaned the parlor, not for appearance, but for memory. She polished the photograph of their parents, straightened every picture frame. She trimmed her hair. When Willamay asked why, she said, "So she sees I'm not ashamed." 3 days later, Ella Vaughn arrived. She came with 2 men, silent, grim, but they did not dismount. Ella rode a bay mare and wore a coat lined with fox fur. Her eyes were pale gray and hard as flint. Willamay stepped forward. "You got my letter." Ella dismounted without assistance. "I came to see the ruin myself." Juniper appeared on the porch. Temperance stood behind her, clutching Samuel's hand. Ella's eyes narrowed. "You still stand together?" "Sometimes barely," Juniper said. "You should have buried Caleb further from the ridge," Ella said. "He belonged nowhere near this land." "He made his choices," Willamay said. "So did you." Ella removed a folded document from her satchel. "I can withdraw the claim. On one condition." "What's that?" Juniper asked. "You sign over your third," Ella said. "You disappear. Never speak of my brother again." Juniper stepped down from the porch. "No." Ella blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Juniper said. "I won't disappear. I won't sell the last of who I am so you can pretend he was worth mourning." Ella's face twisted, rage flaring. "You murdered him." "He died because he lied, stole, and hurt people who trusted him," Juniper said. "I pulled the trigger, but he loaded the gun." Ella raised the paper again. "Then I'll see you in court." Willamay took it gently from her hands, tore it in 2. "You'll see nothing," she said. "This land's been defended with blood. Yours won't change that." Ella turned, silent fury blazing in her eyes. She mounted her horse and rode away without another word. They stood there until the dust settled behind her. Later, Juniper stood in the garden where the first green beans were sprouting. Willamay joined her, quiet. "She'll try again," Juniper said. "Yes," Willamay replied. Juniper looked at her hands. "But I didn't run." "No," Willamay said. "You drew your knife, and you stood." Juniper's eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. She reached for her sister's hand. This time, Willamay took it. In the house, Temperance pressed a kiss to Samuel's cheek. "Thank you," she said, "for being our gentle storm." He smiled. "For being my spring." Outside, the wind stirred the last of the snow from the roots. The ridge did not feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. The morning after Ella Vaughn left, Sparrowbrush Ridge felt impossibly still. The air hung with a scent of thawed soil and ash, as if the land itself had held its breath too long and didn't know how to exhale. The wind had dropped. Even the birds stayed quiet, unsure if peace was real or just the eye of another storm. Juniper woke before the others. She dressed in silence, fastening the buttons of her riding coat with a slowness that betrayed her resolve. She moved like a woman setting down the last piece of a memory she could no longer carry. Her boots clicked softly across the floorboards as she crossed the hallway to the study, the only room she'd come to feel like herself in, and picked up the small satchel already packed by the hearth. Willamay stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, leaning against the frame. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes had the quiet weight of knowing. "You sure?" she asked. Juniper looked up, hands still on the leather straps of the bag. "There's nothing left here for me to sharpen myself against." Willamay stepped into the room, her boots soundless. "You helped build this place. I also helped burn parts of it down." Juniper sighed, straightened. "It's better I go now, before I ruin what's still growing." "You didn't ruin anything," Willamay said. "We survived." Juniper met her gaze. "Not all of us." That silence stretched long. Then, Juniper walked over and placed something in Willamay's hand, a key. Worn, brass, cold. "The cellar lock," Juniper said. "Keep it, in case someone comes knocking who don't deserve to see inside." Willamay held the key in her palm, fingers closing around it slowly. "Where will you go?" she asked. Juniper shrugged. "Maybe east. Maybe north. I don't know yet. But I want to go where no one knows my name, so I can decide what it means without ghosts shouting over me." "I'll miss you," Willamay said, and the words were simple, but they rang through the room like a church bell. Juniper nodded. "And I'll write. Someday." They hugged, awkward, but real, and when Juniper stepped back, her face was wet and she didn't care. She left before the sun rose fully. No one else saw her ride off, just the dust of hooves kicked up against the first golden beams, and the ridge, watching quietly as another of its daughters took her leave. Temperance had taken to humming again. In the garden, while brushing out her hair, sometimes even when she thought no one listened. She'd always done it as a child, back when their mother was alive and mornings still smelled of wildflowers and coffee. That hum returned now, threaded with something new, strength. She sat on the porch swing with Samuel, a blanket around their shoulders. The rhythm of it, the slow back and forth, matched the beating of her heart, steady, unhurried. "Do you ever wonder if we were meant to survive it?" she asked. Samuel turned his face toward hers, the corner of his mouth tilting up. "You mean the storm? The gunfire? The ghosts?" "All of it," she whispered. "Some nights I wake up and think I imagined the snow, the screams, like it couldn't possibly have been us living through that." He brushed a lock of hair from her face, fingers warm and calloused. "We didn't live through it," he said. "We chose through it. Over and over." She leaned into him, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip. "You stayed." "I would again," he answered without pause. Down the path, the garden bloomed in defiance of all that had trampled it. The peas twined up the fence posts, green and sweet. The beans thickened. The tomatoes, stubborn and slow, swelled beneath the sun. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was real. It had roots. Temperance looked out across the horizon. "I think I love this place." Samuel took her hand. "Then let's keep it alive." Inside the manor, Willamay stood in the upstairs bedroom and stared at the mirror above the old oak dresser. She hadn't looked directly at herself in weeks. Maybe longer. Her reflection startled her, hair streaked with silver, cheekbones sharp, a sun-weathered line between her brows. She looked more like her father than she remembered. She turned from the mirror and opened the dresser drawer, pulling out a bundle of letters. Unsent. Unfinished. Letters to a brother buried in Missouri. To a friend she'd once loved but pushed away. Letters she'd written to Juniper and Temperance back when she couldn't say the words aloud. She took them to the fireplace and burned them. Every one. The pages curled, blackened, disappeared into smoke. Ezekiel knocked once and stepped in. "Something dying in here?" he asked. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "Something's always dying, Zeke. It's the only way anything else grows." He nodded, stepping beside her as the final sheet turned to ash. "You think she'll come back?" he asked. "She might," Willamay replied. "But she won't be the same. None of us are." They stood there for a moment, just watching the flames. Then he reached out, slowly, and placed something in her palm, a carved wooden figure, worn smooth at the edges. It was a woman in a long dress, holding a lantern. "Was my mother's," he said. "She said the women who light the way don't always get to walk in it." Willamay stared at the figure, her fingers curling around it. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you," he murmured, "for not sending me away, for letting me stay." She turned to him. "Why did you stay?" He looked at her then, not like a man studying danger or death, but as someone who'd found rest in the shadow of something strong. "Because I saw a woman willing to bleed for land that no man had the courage to protect." A long silence passed between them. Willamay looked at the door, the hallway, the sun rising out the window. "Then maybe," she said softly, "we light the way together." He kissed her, not hurried, not forceful, but with reverence, like she was the center of some still world that finally stopped breaking apart. She did not step away. By noon, Juniper's room stood empty, but not untouched. A single blue vase remained on the windowsill, holding 3 small wildflowers. Willamay found it and ran her thumb across the smooth glass. Temperance found her there. "Do you think she meant to leave it?" Willamay nodded. "She left what she could carry." The two sisters stood by the window and looked out across Sparrowbrush Ridge, past the dead cottonwoods, the distant grave markers, the winding trail that had once brought strangers and death and now, perhaps, something else. "We could plant more beans," Temperance said. "And maybe a second coop," Willamay added. They laughed, light and quiet. Later, as the sun lowered and the shadows grew long across the porch, the town sent riders. 2 men with rifles, not raised. They stopped at the gate. One called out. "Heard the Vaughn claim was dropped. Thought we'd come see if the ridge was open for trade again." Willamay stepped to the porch with Ezekiel and Temperance behind her. She looked at the men for a long moment. "We don't trade in desperation anymore," she said. "If you want eggs, you'll pay fair." They nodded, tipped their hats, and rode on. No insult. No fight. Just recognition. That night, the stars spilled over the ridge like seeds in the sky, everyone a promise. The air cooled, fragrant with sage and pine. Inside the manor, the rooms were still, but not lonely. Willamay lit the last lantern. Temperance hummed while she folded blankets. Samuel closed the shutters. Ezekiel leaned in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes soft. Sparrowbrush Ridge had survived. One sister had stayed, not because duty demanded it, but because she finally believed it mattered. One sister had healed, not by forgetting the pain but by letting herself grow roots. And one had left, carrying both her scars and her strength into a world wide and waiting. If you stood on that porch long enough, You could hear the wind sing a different song than before. Not mourning, not warning, but memory, and the quiet victory of those who endure. And if you ever find yourself near Sparrowbrush Ridge, you might catch a glimpse of lantern light just before dusk, a woman with eyes like thunder, or a girl humming by the gate, or a porch swing still warm from a last goodbye. You may not know their names, but you'll feel it in your chest like something deep and familiar. Some homes are won, others are made. This one, this ridge, was earned.